Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The tent hummed with pre-dawn energy, men scribbling notes on maps, radios crackling, the heavy smell of dust and diesel oil mixing with the faint aroma of burned coffee. They were preparing for another mission, another dangerous push into the Afghan desert. But when the commander called names for the operation, Jones felt the same sting she'd felt so many times before. Her name wasn't among the chosen. Not for reconnaissance, not for overwatch, not for the forward line. She was communications again. She nodded as if the order didn't matter, as if her chest wasn't tight with disappointment, as if she hadn't spent weeks memorizing every contour of the map the way a painter memorizes their canvas. She knew the terrain better than most of the men in that room, but when it came to combat assignments, she was invisible. Jones, 23 years old, 5'4", 125 pounds, was considered too soft, too emotional, too likely to cry over losses instead of compartmentalizing them. The nickname floated around camp, whispered with a smirk, tears, not cruelly, not with malice, but with the dismissive affection soldiers reserve for someone they've already decided will never carry real weight in a firefight. And yet, when 4 bullets would later tear into her body, it wouldn't be any of them who carried the wounded 3 miles under fire. It would be her. But no one knew that yet. At 3:30 that morning had been standing outside the comms tent, tea cooling in her hands as the Afghan mountains glowed gold in the rising sun. She loved those mornings, the quiet before the radios screamed, before orders became chaos, before the desert heat choked the air. Out there, she could almost pretend the war hadn't yet woken up. Almost. But inside the tent, the war was wide awake. Maps sprawled across the tables, red zones marking Taliban strongholds, blue lines threading like veins across the desert floor. Major Harrison, 15 years of special operations etched into the creases of his face, stood at the front, giving orders in the clipped cadence of men who never doubted themselves. "This is Operation Desert Wind," he said. "High-value targets in Sector 12. Join op with SEAL Team 7. I need precision. I need discipline. No mistakes." The names came like bullets, on recon, on Overwatch, Williams handling point comms. Each nod of acknowledgement was another reminder that place was already decided. Finally, "Jones, you're on base communications. Monitor traffic. Keep situation reports clean." There it was, the role that meant being safe, tucked away behind radios and static while others faced the bullets. A role that meant she could do everything right and still never matter. She nodded, professional, expression blank. Inside, though, it burned. Around her, the men exchanged confident grins, adjusting their rifles, talking tactics in the shorthand of brothers in arms. No one looked at her. No one asked her thoughts on terrain, fire solutions, or fallback positions. She might as well have been a shadow against the tent wall. She tried not to hear the voices near the exit. Martinez, whispering low, "Honestly, I'm glad Jones isn't coming. Last thing we need is someone breaking down mid-firefight." His reply was less cruel but no softer. "She's sharp on the technical side, but combat's different. You need people who can compartmentalize. She feels too much." She shuffled her papers to hide the flush rising in her cheeks. She had heard it all before, too emotional, too reactive, too likely to crack under pressure. They didn't know that her so-called weakness was exactly what drove her. The obsessive studying, the late nights memorizing grid lines, the hours pushing her body harder than anyone expected. It was because she felt too much that she had to be ready when no one else was. That afternoon, when the reconnaissance team rolled out into the shimmering desert, stayed behind. She did what no one asked her to do, studied every contour of Sector 12 again. She memorized elevation markers, possible cover, drainage lines, artillery positions. She rehearsed in her head the coordinates she'd call if fire support was needed. She prepared because she knew, deep down, that preparation was the only power she had in a world that had already dismissed her. By 1400 hours, the vehicles were dust clouds on the horizon. adjusted her headset, radio static filling her ears, expecting a routine day of monitoring and log entries. But at 15:37, the first frantic transmission cracked through the silence. "Base, this is Desert Wind 1. We are taking heavy fire. Repeat, heavy fire, Sector 12 Alpha." Voice, tight, urgent, and in the background the thunder of rifles, the sharp bark of RPG fire, men shouting. Pens clattered from her hand, leaned in, fingers flying across dials, boosting signal strength, clearing channels. Around the comms center, heads snapped up. Every soldier knew the sound of an ambush. "Desert Wind, this is base," Harrison's voice cut in from the command room. "What's your situation?" Gunfire nearly drowned out the reply. "Multiple hostiles, 15 to 20 fighters. It was an ambush. We've got 2 men down, 1 critical, requesting immediate extraction and close air support." Pulse hammered. Her hands, the ones they thought too shaky, moved without hesitation, securing encryption, opening artillery links, logging frequencies. Every sound in that transmission was data to her. The cadence of breathing, the muffled echo of RPGs, the faint crack of rifles too close to be friendly. "Extraction 20 minutes out," Harrison ordered. "Can you hold position?" A pause, more gunfire. Then again, "Negative, sir. Position compromised. Moving to secondary extraction. Wounded can't move fast. We need artillery support on our 6. Before the words even finished, was already calculating. She knew the terrain, the ridges, the angles. Her pen scribbled grid references she could recite from memory. She opened the fire direction net with practiced calm. She said, steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, "This is Jones. I need your grid reference for artillery coordination." A beat of silence, confusion. "Who Jones? You're not certified for." "I've got it," she interrupted, punching numbers into the console. "Send your coordinates." He did. She transmitted. The room around her went still. She heard Harrison in the background, barking for the actual artillery officer, but there wasn't time for protocols. And then came the words that froze everyone. "Base, we've got a bigger problem. SEAL Team 7 is also in Sector 12. They're not responding. Last known position less than 2 clicks from us." The air in the comms tent turned heavy. SEAL Team 7, elite operators missing, possibly ambushed. That meant not 1 but 2 groups were trapped. 10 minutes passed. Coordinated suppression fire for team, her voice unshakable even as panic scratched at the edges of the room. Then at 15:52, a faint signal cut through. Any station, this is SEAL Team 7. We are down to 2 effectives, multiple wounded. Request immediate assistance." The voice was weak, fatting, triangulated instantly, 3 miles from the ambush site, pinned in a ravine. No clear escape. Extraction still 20 minutes out. 2 KIA, 2 critical, 2 walking wounded, the voice rasped. Surrounded, taking fire from elevated positions. Can't move without help. His eyes locked on the tactical map. Options unraveled in her mind like broken wires. The extraction team couldn't divert. Artillery couldn't risk fire that close. Air support too far. Someone had to reach them, now. And for the first time, everyone in the comms center turned toward her. No one said it, but they all knew. Sorry. The emotional one. The small one. The one never chosen. She was the only one who knew the terrain well enough, the only one already locked into their signals, the only one who had prepared for a situation no one else had even imagined. Her heart hammered. To go meant breaking orders. To stay meant listening to men die on her radio. She looked at the map, at the flashing signals of 2 teams fighting for survival, and then she stood, slowly, deliberately, gathering her gear. "Jones, what are you doing?" Williams asked, eyes wide. "I'm going to get them," she said, calm, certain. "You can't, you're not authorized. Your comm's not infantry, you've never even been in." She cut him off, strapping her vest tight. "Sergeant, those SEALs have maybe 15 minutes. Extraction's 20. Air support is 20. Artillery will kill them if it fires. Someone has to reach them. Someone has to be there." He stared at her, incredulous. "That someone isn't you." Met his eyes, voice low. "Then who is it?" The tent was silent. Radios crackling, gunfire echoing faint through speakers. And in that silence she knew this was the moment her life split in two. The version where she obeyed orders and stayed invisible, and the version where she left, carrying not just a pack and rifle, but the weight of lives on her shoulders. She tightened her helmet strap, reached for the door. Williams called after her, "What do I tell the major?" She didn't look back. "Tell him I went to bring our people home." Outside, the Afghan sun burned bright. The desert stretched endless, merciless. Every ridge a trap, every shadow a question. She stepped into it anyway, small, dismissed, too emotional. And about to prove them all wrong. What kind of soldier leaves the safety of base, alone, into 3 miles of enemy territory? Asked herself that with every step she took, boots grinding against dry earth, rifle snug against her chest. The sun had dipped lower, stretching shadows across the desert hills. It should have been beautiful. The kind of landscape poets tried to capture, ridges carved by centuries of wind, valleys where silence felt ancient. But beauty in Afghanistan was never innocent. Every ridge could hide a muzzle. Every silence could erupt into fire. She kept moving. Her pack pressed heavy against her shoulders, every pound doubled by the knowledge of what she was walking into. Radios crackled faintly in her ear, the voices of men already fighting for their lives. SEAL Team 7. Chief's voice strained under exhaustion. 2 wounded. Ammo low. They've got the high ground. We can't hold much longer. Every instinct screamed at her to hurry, but haste could kill her faster than bullets. She balanced speed with stealth, the way she had trained in private when no one thought it mattered. The first 20 minutes passed in silence, except for the occasional pulse of gunfire echoing from somewhere ahead. Used every scrap of knowledge she'd hoarded. Drainage channels invisible to drones, outcroppings that looked like rock but concealed natural trenches, the subtle shift in sand that marked where runoff had carved a path. Others had thought her obsession with maps was pointless. Now it was saving her life. The gunfire grew sharper, closer. The SEALs were still alive, that mattered. She keyed her mic, voice low, steady. "SEAL Team 7, this is Jones. I'm 1 click out, southeast approach. Sitrep." A pause, then a voice rough but unmistakable. "Jones, as in base comms." "Yes, Chief, I'm inbound. I have medical supplies and artillery coordination. Hold your position." A dry laugh, bitter under fire. "You're approaching us. You're not part of the extraction." "Negative," she said, ducking beneath a ridge as an RPG thumped in the distance. Dust plumed skyward, blotting the sun for an instant. "I'm just someone who refuses to let you die today." Silence on the net, then a simple reply. "Copy that, we'll hold." Her heart kicked harder. They were counting on her. The last 500 meters were brutal. The terrain turned jagged, steep slopes, gullies that funneled movement into exposed lanes. She could hear the firefight clearly now. The sharp rhythm of M4s, the harsher roar of AK-47s, shouts in Pashto cutting through the echoes. Then, cresting a low ridge, she saw it. A ravine spread out below, carved deep into the earth, a natural bowl-turned killing field. The SEALs were pinned behind rocks and the charred skeleton of a vehicle. 2 bodies lay still, motionless. 4 others fired in bursts, their return shots scattered, slower now, ammunition running out. Above them, the Taliban controlled the high ground. At least a dozen fighters. Muzzle flashes blinked from like angry stars. They fired down with casual dominance, knowing gravity and position were on their side. His breath caught. The SEALs couldn't last much longer. But she hadn't come this far to watch them die. She dropped to her belly, scanning the terrain. Her eyes found what months of study had promised her, a drainage channel along the eastern wall, almost invisible unless you knew it was there. To the enemy, it was just another shadow. To her, it was a lifeline. She keyed the artillery net. Her voice clipped professional. Fire direction, this is Forward Observer Jones. Request fire mission. Grid reference 41RQ targets, 12 to 15 enemy fighters on northern. Danger close, friendlies 300 meters south. The reply crackled with disbelief. Jones, you're not certified, we cannot authorize. Chief's voice broke in. This is SEAL Team 7. I authorize Jones as forward observer. Send it. Another pause. Then the calm voice of the artillery officer, Roger, fire mission accepted, shot out. His pulse hammered as she whispered into her mic, Chief, 30 seconds, brace. The world erupted. The ridge exploded in fire and dust, shockwaves rolling through the ravine like thunder unleashed. Stones rained from the cliffs. Enemy muzzle flashes vanished beneath the barrage. For a moment, just a moment, the battlefield went silent. Moved. She slid into the drainage channel, low crawling through rocks and thorns. Dust choked her lungs. The ground shook with aftershocks. She scraped her knees bloody, elbows raw, but she didn't stop. Halfway down, gunfire resumed. They had spotted her. Bullets snapped past, whining like angry bees. One tore fabric near her sleeve. She flattened, pressed into the dirt, heart slamming. She could turn back. She could retreat to safety, return to the base, tell herself she'd tried. But then she heard it, one of the SEALs, voice hoarse, desperate. We're out of ammo. That sealed it, crawled forward. 10 minutes later, she rolled into the ravine beside the team. Dust coated her face, hair matted with sweat. Chief blinked in disbelief at the sight of her. This small soldier, helmet tilted, rifle slung, eyes alight with fire. I'll be damned, he muttered. You actually made it. No time, said. She dropped beside a wounded man, chest rising shallow under bloodied armor. She checked vitals, pulled out bandages, worked with the speed of training honed in shadows. Another SEAL groaned in agony, shrapnel embedded in his abdomen and leg. Stomach clenched, but her hands didn't falter. She packed wounds, tightened tourniquets. Crouched near her, rifle spitting fire over the rocks. Even if we stabilize them, we're surrounded. There's no way out. There is, she said, pointing back to the channel she'd crawled through. Leads to a defensive position 500 meters south. Good cover, suitable for extraction. Shook his head. We can't carry 2 critical casualties up that slope under fire. Looked at unconscious, heavy. Looked at barely conscious, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Then she looked at. We're not going up, she said quietly. We're going through. Another barrage shook the ridges. She had already called in suppressive fire, already timed the chaos. When the thunder rolled, moved. She hoisted onto her shoulders. A fireman's carry, trained, practiced, perfected alone in the dark when others were sleeping. His weight crushed her frame, pressing pain into her bones. But she rose, 1 foot forward, then another. Chief, cover, she shouted. His men opened fire, their M4s spitting desperate bursts. Stumbled into the drainage channel, his limp body across her shoulders, every step a battle. The slope tilted treacherous. Rocks slid underfoot. Once she nearly fell, his body almost dragging them both into open fire. Pain seared her ribs as she slammed into a boulder, teeth gritted to choke back a cry. But she didn't stop. Behind her, his team dragged, firing as they moved. Above them, artillery rained down, keeping the enemy's heads low. For now. Step by step, forced herself forward. His weight pressed her lungs flat. Sweat poured into her eyes. Her thighs trembled with effort. But the thought repeated like a mantra, he will not die here. He will not die here. Minutes stretched into forever. At last she stumbled into the defensive position, a hollow of rock with natural walls, clear, perfect for a last stand. She lowered gently, breath ragged, arms trembling. She keyed her mic. Chief, position secure. Bring will hold here. Outstanding, replied voice ragged. Moving now. But even as he spoke, enemy fire intensified. The Taliban had adapted, shifting positions, angling to cut them off. Saw muzzle flashes darting like fireflies along the ridge. They were repositioning faster than artillery could keep up. She called another fire mission, adjusted coordinates mid-burst, voice steady even as rounds cracked inches overhead. Dust and rock stung her face, her eyes, her lungs. She didn't flinch. Not when was still out there. Not when blood was already soaking the sand beneath her knees. Not when every instinct screamed that her own life was already hanging by a thread. She dug deeper, past fear, past exhaustion, into that place inside her everyone else had mistaken for weakness, the place that cared too much. All stations, she whispered into the mic as another wave of fire rained down, her voice calm, certain. This is Jones, hold on, we're bringing everyone home today. What does a soldier do when the sky itself is falling? The ground shook as artillery slammed into sending plumes of dust and fire curling into the fading light. Every blast echoed down into the ravine like a giant's heartbeat. The Taliban were forced to cover, but only for seconds at a time. Then their rifles cracked back to life. Tracer rounds streaked through the air like burning arrows, ricocheting off rock near's head. She crouched low behind the natural wall of stone, breath ragged, unconscious beside her. His blood pooled dark against the sand, soaking into her gloves as she tightened a bandage across his abdomen. The smell of iron clung to the air. She keyed the mic with her good hand. Chief, status. We're halfway, his voice cut through static, ragged with exertion. Gunfire rattled in the background. Is slipping, barely conscious. We're running out of ammo. Ducked as a burst of AK fire stitched the rocks above her. Shards rained down. She flinched, then forced her hands steady. Her fingers worked mechanically, bandages, pressure, fluids from her kit. Needed more than she could give, but at least he was alive. For now. Copy, she said, calm, too calm. I'll cover your movement, get here fast. She glanced at her rifle, then at the muzzle flashes sparking from too many angles, too much ground, but hesitation wasn't an option. She braced her rifle against the rock and fired. Controlled, precise. One shot, a pause, another. She didn't waste rounds, every trigger pull was deliberate. Months of training in the shadows now burned through her muscles like instinct. The first target dropped, then another. For a moment the suppressive fire thinned, giving men room to drag forward. But the enemy was disciplined. They adjusted. Within seconds, rounds hammered her position again, sparks spitting off stone. Shifted, rolling to a new angle before the barrage pinned her down. Her heart pounded, each breath sharp with adrenaline. Jones called, his voice tight. We're exposed, keep that fire coming. She rose higher over the rocks, ignoring the bullets snapping past her helmet. Her shots cracked steady, carving open narrow windows of survival. Steam moved through them like ghosts, dragging inch by inch toward safety. But the math was brutal. Too many enemies, too few rounds, too much ground left. And then the first bullet found her. The impact hit her shoulder like a sledgehammer. She staggered back, her rifle slipping from her grip, pain radiating down her arm. Her vision blurred. She gasped, but she didn't fall. Her left arm hung useless, blood seeping through torn fabric. She grabbed the rifle with her right hand, teeth clenched, and forced herself back into firing position. Contact left, she shouted, her voice harsh with pain. She squeezed the trigger. A Taliban fighter crumpled. Another ducked for cover. The SEALs surged forward a few more meters. But then came the second round. It tore into her thigh, hot and sharp, nearly buckling her to the ground. She bit down on a scream. Fire shot up her leg, but she forced it to hold. She shifted weight, balanced awkwardly, kept firing. Her world shrank to the rhythm of breath, pain, trigger. Third round her side. A flash of agony just beneath her body armor. The impact knocked her flat. Dust filled her lungs. She coughed, choking, ears ringing. Her rifle was gone. She scrambled for it, dragging herself through grit with her good arm. Fingers closed on the weapon's stock. She dragged it close, rolled against the rock, and raised it again. Her breaths came shallow now, each one tasting of copper. Blood ran into her gloves. The fourth round grazed her scalp, tearing skin, hot blood running down into her eyes. The world spun. Still she fired. "Jesus Christ, Jones!" His voice broke across the net. He was closer now, his men finally breaching the defensive position, dragging with them. "You've been hit 4 times." "I'm fine," rasped. Her voice cracked, but her aim didn't. She put 2 more rounds into the ridge, forcing a machine gunner to duck back. "Get ready for extraction. Helicopters are inbound." She wasn't fine. Her body was breaking, her blood soaking into the desert floor. Her left arm was gone, her thigh screaming, her side bleeding freely, her head spinning in and out of clarity. But quitting was not an option. Not with men still alive beside her. Not with the inbound and needing cover. "Jones, you need a medic now," insisted, crouching beside her, firing over the rocks. His eyes flicked to her wounds, his expression sharp with disbelief. "You can't even stand." She turned her head toward him, eyes burning through the haze. "Negative and go first, priority." "You'll bleed out." "Then I bleed out after they're safe." There was no fear in her tone, no hesitation, just steady resolve. Stared at her for a beat, then nodded, jaw tight. He understood. He didn't like it, but he understood. The enemy fire intensified again. Bullets hammered their cover, dust spraying like water under rain. The helicopter's rotors thumped faint in the distance, still minutes out. Reloaded clumsily, her fingers slick with blood. The mag slipped once, twice, before finally locking. She forced her breathing steady. Each trigger pull sent pain lancing through her shoulder. Each recoil jarred her wounded side, but she kept firing. Her shots weren't just bullets. They were defiance. Proof. Every crack of her rifle was a refusal to be dismissed, to let men die, to let her so-called weakness define her. Time stretched. Seconds felt like hours. She clung to consciousness, vision narrowing, darkness creeping at the edges. But she didn't stop. Because stopping meant failure, and failure meant death for men who were counting on her. When the helicopter finally thundered overhead, felt something inside her release, a sliver of relief breaking through the pain. But it wasn't over. The Taliban spotted the aircraft, their fire shifting toward it, tracer rounds streaking through the sky. Saw them, saw the arcs of death reaching for the bird that was supposed to save them. "Chief," she croaked, barely audible, "the bird's taking fire. They won't land unless we suppress." Men fired desperately, but their ammo was nearly gone. Mags clicked empty, their shots thinned. It was down to her. Pushed herself upright against the rock, rifle braced against her good arm. Blood streamed from her head, stung her eyes. Her hands shook, but she steadied them. She fired one shot, then another. Her rounds cracked against muzzle flashes on the northern ridge. Fighters ducked back. The helicopter dropped lower. Her vision blurred, blackness closed in. Still she fired. Each shot tore more from her body than she had left to give. But she gave anyway. And when the helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and rotor wash, whence men rushed to load and aboard, stayed behind her rock, rifle barking, keeping the enemy pinned. Her strength was gone, her blood was nearly all spilled, but her will held. Until finally, it didn't. Her rifle slipped from her hand, her body crumpled. She collapsed into the dust, the world fading. The last thing she felt was a hand grabbing her vest, dragging her toward the helicopter. His voice above the roar, raw and fierce. "She carried us 3 miles with 4 gunshot wounds. She didn't stop. Don't you dare let her die now." Then darkness. How long can a person fight after losing that much blood? The question hung in the medic's mind as he pressed bandages into his side, his gloves already soaked crimson. The bucked under fire, tracers streaking past the windows. The crew chief shouted above the roar, dragging and deeper into the bird. But it was who drew every eye, small, pale, soaked in her own blood, and yet when they found her she'd still been firing. "Gunshot wound to left shoulder penetrating," the medic shouted, his voice taut with urgency. "Right thigh through and through, left lateral heavy bleed, head graze, she's critical, BP's crashing." Chief knelt beside her stretcher, one hand clamped hard on the side wound, his other gripping her vest as though he could will her to stay. His own face was streaked with dust and sweat, but his eyes burned with something else: disbelief. This woman carried 3 miles like this, the crew chief muttered, shaking his head as he guided the helicopter into evasive maneuvers. "She carried us," snapped, "period, don't forget it." His eyes fluttered, barely open. The world around her blurred into fragments, rotor wash shouted commands, the rattle of machine gun fire from the store guns. She tried to speak, but the sound came out as a rasp. "Stay with me," Jones said, leaning close. "You're not done yet, not by a long shot." The medic checked her pulse, grimaced. "Weak, thready. If we don't get her on a table in 10, she's gone." The pilot's voice cut in over the intercom. "ETA Trauma Center, 12 minutes. "Make it 10, the medic barked. The helicopter surged forward, engines screaming as they pushed the limits, drifted in and out of awareness. The desert below flickered past like a dream, hills and valleys painted in the dying light of the sun. She thought of the quiet mornings outside the comms tent, tea cooling in her hands, mountains glowing gold. She thought of how small she had felt, how invisible. Now men's lives had hung on her shoulders, literally. And she had not been invisible. She slipped under again. When the slammed down on the pad at forward operating base Wolverine, medics were already sprinting forward, stretchers ready, and were whisked off first, stabilized but still fragile. Stern came last, her body limp, blood still dripping from soaked bandages. "This one's critical," the flight medic shouted as they raced through the doors of the trauma center. 4 GSWs, massive blood loss, hypotensive move. The surgical team descended like hawks, cutting away gear, hooking IVs, intubating. Machines screamed as they tried to stabilize her vitals. And just outside the operating room doors, Chief stood frozen, his hands stained red. "Chief," a nurse said, trying to guide him away, "we'll take it from here." He shook his head. "Not leaving, not until I know she's okay." Word spread quickly. By the time Major Harrison reached the trauma wing, whispers had already rippled through the base. A comms specialist, alone, rescued 2 SEALs, carried them through fire, 4 gunshot wounds. Harrison stared through the observation glass at the chaos inside, doctors shouting orders, his pale body under surgical lights. "She wasn't even on the operational roster today," he murmured. "No, sir," Sergeant Williams replied at his side. He looked ashamed, his eyes fixed on the floor. "She was supposed to be on the radios. And she went anyway." "Yes, sir." The weight of it settled heavy in Harrison's chest. He had overlooked her, dismissed her, assigned her to manifests and reports, believing her emotions made her unfit for the field. And now, those same emotions had driven her into the most daring rescue the base had ever seen. "Sir," Williams added quietly, "the SEALs are saying she saved them, all of them." Harrison didn't reply. He just kept staring through the glass. Inside, the surgeons worked. Hours bled away. Bullet fragments removed. Tissue repaired. Blood pumped into her veins as fast as it poured out. Machines hummed, monitors beeped, hands moved in precise choreography. Outside, Chief sat in a chair he refused to leave. His uniform stiff with blood, his rifle still slung, untouched since the firefight. "Chief, you need rest," the nurse told him again. "I'll rest when she wakes up." Across the corridor, lay propped in a bed, pale but conscious, heavily bandaged, drifted in morphine haze. Both had refused transfer until they knew about her. Hours passed. The base shifted into night rhythm, but no one really slept. Word had traveled beyond Wolverine across radio nets through command channels. By evening, her name was being spoken in Kabul. By midnight, in the Pentagon. Finally, after 6 grueling hours, the doors swung open. Dr. Sarah, the lead surgeon, pulled off her cap. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes carried something softer. "She's stable," announced. "We removed fragments from the shoulder and thigh, repaired internal bleeding from the side wound. The head graze was superficial, but she's lost a lot of blood. Recovery will be long, but she's alive." Relief hit the corridor like a wave. Slumped forward, his face in his hands. Closed his eyes, whispering a thank you under his breath. Even Williams, who had muttered doubts about her only that morning, exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Alive. Not whole, not unscarred, but alive. Still, the questions weren't over. The next day, Colonel Martinez arrived, sent to conduct an immediate investigation. The word unauthorized hung over everything like a storm cloud. Had disobeyed orders, abandoned her post, acted alone. She should be facing charges. And yet 2 SEALs were alive because of her. Harrison met Martinez in the briefing room, where files were stacked in neat piles, evidence for and against her. "Major," Martinez said coolly, "can you explain how a communications specialist ended up in the middle of a firefight, coordinating artillery and carrying wounded?" Harrison hesitated, his jaw tightened, because she was the only one who could. Or the only one reckless enough to try. "Call it what you want," he said, his voice harder than before. "But she succeeded, and those men are alive because of it." Martinez made a note. "We'll see what she has to say for herself." But wasn't ready to answer questions yet. She was still unconscious, her body fighting its way back from the brink. It wasn't until 18 hours later that her eyes finally opened. The room was dim, machines beeping steadily at her bedside. Her throat burned from intubation. Her body felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together with fire. And there, in a chair beside her bed, sat Chief. He was reading a battered paperback, his uniform jacket draped over the back of the chair. When he saw her stir, he dropped the book instantly. "Jones," he said, leaning close. Relief flickered across his face in a way no battlefield mask could hide. "Welcome back." Her lips were dry, her voice barely a whisper. How are you?" Blinked. For a moment he didn't speak. Of all the things she could have asked, the first words after clawing her way back from death, it wasn't about herself. "They're alive," he said finally, his voice soft. "Both recovering." Closed her eyes briefly. A faint smile touched her lips. "Good, that's good." Shook his head in disbelief. "Jones, do you even realize what you did out there?" Her gaze drifted to him, still clouded by medication. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," said firmly. "You did what no one else could." Silence filled the room for a long moment. Machines hummed. His chest rose and fell slowly, her breath shallow but steady. And in that silence, the weight of what had happened began to settle, not just for her, but for everyone who had doubted her, dismissed her, underestimated her. They had called her too emotional, too soft. But the truth was undeniable now. Those very emotions, the ones they thought would break her, had carried her further than most men ever could. And the war, the military, maybe even the definition of strength itself, would never look the same again. What do you say to someone who saved lives by breaking every rule in the book? Colonel Martinez stood at the foot of his bed, her uniform immaculate, eyes sharp. She had the aura of someone who'd seen 100 soldiers like, and 100 more she hadn't. By regulation was a problem. A specialist who had abandoned her post, violated orders, endangered mission protocol. By reality, she was a miracle. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. sat propped against pillows, pale, her left arm bound in thick dressings, her leg braced, her side stitched tight beneath layers of gauze. She looked small under the weight of tubes and wires, but her eyes, those were alive. Martinez didn't waste time. "Specialist Jones, do you understand why you're here?" His voice was still weak but steady. "Yes, ma'am." "You disobeyed direct orders. You abandoned your station. You entered enemy territory without authorization, all of which could result in court-martial." Chief, seated near the bed, bristled. "With respect, Colonel, she also saved my team. Without her, 2 SEALs would be dead right now." Martinez's gaze didn't move. "Chief, you'll have your chance to speak." She turned back to, "Tell me, Specialist, why did you leave the base?" Drew a breath. The weight of the question pressed down on her chest heavier than her bandages. She thought back to the moment in the comms tent, the sounds of men dying over the radio, the silence of those who had dismissed her, the map burning in her mind. "Because I could hear it," she said softly. "The panic, the desperation. They didn't have time for protocols or chains of command. They needed someone, and I knew the terrain. I knew the artillery grids. I knew where they were. If I didn't go, they were going to die." Martinez's jaw tightened. "You thought your judgment outweighed the chain of command." Shook her head. "No, ma'am, I didn't think at all. I just knew I couldn't sit in that chair and listen to them die when I could help." Martinez's eyes narrowed, studying her. "Do you realize that if you had failed, if the SEALs had been killed, or if you had been captured, this entire operation could have collapsed? Classified assets compromised. Lives lost. That's why rules exist." Gaze didn't waver. "Yes, ma'am, but rules don't mean anything if everyone's dead." The colonel stared at her for a long beat, expression unreadable. Around them the air felt thick, charged. Finally spoke, his voice low but fierce. "With respect, Colonel, I was there, I saw it. I saw her stand when 4 bullets tried to put her down. I saw her carry on her back through hell. Regulations didn't save us. She did." Martinez's eyes flicked toward him, then back to, "And what about you, Specialist? Do you feel proud of what you did?" The question stung, lowered her gaze. Proud. She thought of unconscious, of bleeding in the sand, of the way every bullet had torn her flesh while she kept walking. She thought of the look in his eyes as he dragged her limp body to the helicopter. "I don't feel proud," she said finally. "I feel relieved that they're alive, that's all." For the first time, Martinez's expression softened. Barely. She tapped her pen against the clipboard, then set it down. "You'll write a full report, every detail. Until then, this review is suspended." She turned on her heel but paused at the door. "Specialist." Looked up. "You're alive because of sheer will. That's rare. But will alone doesn't build an army. Don't confuse courage with insubordination." And then she was gone. The room was silent again, save for the machines. Let her head sink back against the pillow. Her body ached, her wounds screamed, but the colonel's words cut sharper than any bullet. Don't confuse courage with insubordination. She closed her eyes. Was that what she had done? Been insubordinate? Or was it something else, something beyond the language of orders and reports? "You did the right thing," said quietly, as though reading her thoughts. She opened her eyes, met his. "Did I, or did I just get lucky?" Leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Luck doesn't carry 2 men through 3 miles of fire. Luck doesn't stay conscious after 4 rounds. That wasn't luck. That was you." Wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered, sharp and heavy. The days that followed blurred together, dressing changes, painkillers, slow movements through physical therapy. But the war outside didn't stop, and neither did the whispers. Across the base, soldiers spoke her name with a mix of awe and disbelief. Jones. The comms girl. The one they shot 4 times. The one who carried SEALs out of hell. Some spoke with admiration, others with unease, because her story didn't fit neatly into categories. She was both a hero and a liability, both proof of resilience and evidence of disobedience. and felt both weights pressing against her chest. One evening, a nurse wheeled her outside onto the balcony of the recovery ward. The Afghan night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like shattered glass. The desert stretched endless and silent, as if the land itself had no memory of the day's violence. Stood beside her, hands resting on the rail. For a long time they just looked at the horizon. Finally spoke. "I keep thinking about it. If I'd stayed at the radio, followed orders, maybe they'd have died, but maybe I'd still be whole. Maybe none of this." She gestured weakly at the bandages, the IV lines, the wheelchair. "Maybe it wasn't worth it." Turned toward her, his face lit by starlight. "You want to know if it was worth it? Ask their families. They'll tell you what it meant." Swallowed hard. "But what about the army? To them, I'm a problem, a soldier who doesn't follow orders." His gaze was steady. "Maybe, but sometimes the army needs problems, because problems are the ones who refuse to let rules bury men alive." His words sank deep, a counterweight to the doubts that gnawed at her. She didn't answer, not yet, but in her chest something loosened. Days later, Colonel Martinez returned. This time the briefing room was full. Major Harrison, chief, in a wheelchair on crutches. Even Williams, stiff and uneasy, stood at the edge. Martinez took her place at the head of the table. Her voice was crisp, deliberate. "I've reviewed the reports. I've spoken to survivors. Specialist Jones did indeed violate orders and abandon her assigned role. By regulation, that would normally result in disciplinary action. However," she let the word hang, "the circumstances were extraordinary. Without her actions, multiple operators would be dead. Therefore, I am recommending no charges. Instead, her file will reflect commendation for valor." Sat quietly as the words landed. Commendation. No charges. Relief washed through the room, smiled faintly. Grinned despite his pain. Harrison exhaled as if he'd been holding breath for days. But didn't smile. Commendation or not, her heart still felt heavy. Martinez's eyes found hers. "Specialist, I want you to understand something. What you did out there, it was extraordinary. But extraordinary cannot become the standard. Soldiers are built on discipline. If every one of them made decisions based only on heart, there would be chaos." Nodded faintly. "I understand, ma'am." Martinez studied her a moment longer. Then, softer than before, "But don't ever lose that heart. It's rare. And rare has a way of changing wars." The meeting adjourned. Papers signed. Commendation filed. And just like that, Jones went from being invisible to being the soldier everyone talked about. Yet in the quiet of her own thoughts, she knew the truth. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a problem. She was simply human. A human who couldn't stand still while others bled. And maybe she thought that was enough. How do you rebuild a body that's been torn apart? The answer, learned, wasn't just one surgery, one bandage, one stitch at a time. It was every small moment in between. Every breath she forced into her lungs when pain tried to steal it. Every step she took when her leg trembled under the weight of its own memory. Every time she looked at her scars and chose not to look away. Recovery was a war of its own. The first week she couldn't sit up without help. Her shoulder screamed when she shifted. Her thigh ached like a burning coal lodged deep in the muscle. Breathing sent fire through her side. Nurses moved her as if she were made of glass. Hated it. But she endured it. By the second week, she forced herself upright, teeth gritted against pain. She'd shuffle a few steps down the hallway, clinging to the rail, sweat dripping down her temples. Every step felt like a mile, but she kept going. Because if she stopped, if she gave in, it would mean the bullets had won. And that she could not accept. The base saw her differently now. Where once she'd been the quiet comms girl in the corner, barely noticed, now heads turned when she wheeled by, or when she hobbled on crutches through the mess hall. Soldiers she had never spoken to before gave nods of respect. Some saluted her outright. She wasn't used to it. She didn't want it. The attention sat on her shoulders heavier than the rifle she had carried. But what struck her most were the men who once doubted her. Sergeant Williams, who had dismissed her as too soft in more than one briefing, stopped by her bed one evening. He lingered awkwardly at the doorway before stepping inside. I heard and are both stable now," he said. "They are," answered quietly. Williams shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I was wrong about you. All of us were. I don't know if I could done what you did. I just wanted to say I'm sorry and thank you." Studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant." That was all. No grand speeches, just 2 words. But Williams left with his shoulders as if her forgiveness was more than he deserved. The SEALs visited too. Leaning on crutches, cracked a grin when he saw her. "You carried me like a sack of potatoes. My wife's never gonna let me live that down." Pale but steady, clasped her hand. "You gave me a second chance. I owe you everything." Squeezed his fingers weakly. "You don't owe me anything, just live, that's enough." But even as they thanked her, even as the bass whispered her name like a legend, felt a hollow space growing inside her. Because survival came with a cost. At night, when the morphine wore thin and the ward fell silent, the memories came. The ridge exploding under artillery, the scream of bullets tearing stone, the way her body crumpled when the 4th round hit, the weight of across her shoulders, every step echoing like an eternity. She'd wake in a sweat, chest heaving, clutching at bandages. Sometimes she thought she could still feel the rifle slipping from her fingers, the world going black. She didn't tell anyone, not the doctors, not the SEALs. They looked at her like a hero. Heroes weren't supposed to wake up screaming. Instead, she carried it alone, just like she had carried them. One afternoon, weeks into recovery, she sat outside the ward with Chief. The desert stretched endless before them, heat shimmering on the horizon. She leaned heavily on crutches, but she was upright. That mattered. Lit a cigarette, the smoke curling upward in the still air. He offered her one. She shook her head. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, exhaling. "A comms specialist saves a SEAL team. You realize there are people back home who won't even believe this story." Smiled faintly. "Maybe that's for the best." Looked at her, brow furrowed. "You don't want credit." She shook her head. "Credit doesn't stop the nightmares. It doesn't give me back the blood I left in that ravine. It doesn't change the fact that I disobeyed orders. No medal's gonna fix that." Studied her a moment longer. Then he said, "Maybe not, but it might remind others that courage doesn't always come from where you expect it." His words lingered but didn't answer. She just stared at the horizon, where mountains rose like jagged scars against the sky. Day by day, she fought her way back. Physical therapy pushed her to the edge, stretching torn muscles, rebuilding strength in her shoulder, retraining her body to move without faltering. She gritted her teeth, refused to quit, even when tears stung her eyes from the pain. The therapists called her stubborn. She called it survival. By the 3rd month, she could walk unaided, though with a limp. By the 4th, she could fire a rifle again. The recoil hurt, but she held steady. By the 5th, she was running short drills with a pack on her back, sweat streaking down her temples, lungs burning. But recovery wasn't just physical, it was emotional. One evening, Major Harrison approached her in the gym. She was finishing a slow set of pull-ups, her face lined with effort, bandages still visible beneath her shirt. "Specialist," he said, clearing his throat, "I wanted to apologize." Dropped down, catching her breath. "For what, sir?" "For not seeing you, for underestimating you, for treating your empathy as a flaw instead of what it is, a strength. You taught us all something out there." She wiped sweat from her forehead, studied him quietly. Then she said, "I didn't do it to teach anyone, sir. I did it because I couldn't stand still." Harrison nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's the lesson." He left her with that, and for the first time allowed herself to feel the faint stirrings of pride. Not for the firefight, not for the blood, but for surviving, for refusing to stand still when it mattered. And yet, despite progress, despite commendations, despite whispers of her name spreading far beyond the base, felt something unresolved deep inside her. Because survival wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of what came after. What does it mean to return when you're no longer the same? Asked herself that question every morning as she laced her boots. The motions were familiar, but the body inside them was different. Her shoulder stiffened with every reach. Her thigh burned with each step. Her side pulled against the stitches even months later, a reminder that the bullets had not only torn flesh, they had changed her. The Army called it light duty. No combat assignments, no heavy loads. She was cleared for comms, intelligence, support, but knew the truth. Once you've crossed the line between surviving and almost not, light duty feels like exile. Yet the base watched her differently now. The soldiers who once ignored her now made room when she passed. Some stopped to shake her hand. Some whispered her name with reverence. To them, she was proof that resilience could have a face, that the soft-spoken comms girl had carried SEALs through fire and refused to fall. But reverence came with distance. They treated her like something fragile, untouchable, like a myth, and hated myths because myths weren't real. The real still woke at night drenched in sweat, heart hammering from dreams of tracer fire and falling bodies. The real sometimes froze when the crack of gunfire echoed on the training range. The real still bled inside, even if the wounds were stitched. She carried that silence the way she had carried, heavy, relentless, invisible to anyone not close enough to feel it. Chief noticed. He always did. One morning he found her sitting on the edge of the range, rifle across her lap, hands still. "Thinking too much?" he asked, lowering himself onto the bench beside her. "Maybe," she said, "or not enough." He studied her for a moment. "You're cleared to shoot. Why aren't you?" She looked at the targets downrange, little black silhouettes standing stiff in the distance. "Because when I look at them, I don't see paper anymore. I see faces. I hear them shouting. And I wonder, how many more will it take? How many before it's me who doesn't come back?" Lit a cigarette, let the smoke drift upward. That question never leaves Jones, not for any of us. You just learn to live with it. She looked at him, eyes tired. "Have you?" His silence was answer enough. The war didn't wait for her healing. Missions kept rolling. Convoys left the gates. Helicopters thundered into the night. Sometimes was gone for days, returning with fresh lines etched into his face. Watched them leave, felt the ache of wanting to go with them, felt the sting of being left behind. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to rejoin the rhythm. Back in the comms tent, her voice carried authority it never had before. When she called fire missions, no one second-guessed her. When she briefed routes, soldiers listened. Her words carried weight, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it in blood. And something strange happened. Men who had once brushed past her now sought her counsel, not just about grids or frequencies, but about fear, about doubt, about the things they couldn't say out loud. One night, a young private lingered after a shift. He looked barely 20. His hands shook as he adjusted his headset. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, how did you keep going out there when you were shot? How did you not quit?" Paused, her fingers resting on the radio dial. She saw his fear, the same fear she'd carried, the kind no training ever erased. "I wanted to quit," she admitted softly. "Every step I wanted to, but quitting wasn't an option because men were alive in my hands. I just kept telling myself, one more step, not a mile, not an hour, just one more step. And then another. That's all survival is. One step more than you think you can take." The private swallowed hard, nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." After he left, sat in silence, staring at the dim glow of the radios. She realized then that survival had given her something she hadn't expected, not just scars, but a voice others needed to hear. Still, the weight of her own doubt never fully lifted. Weeks later, she was summoned to Kabul. The Pentagon wanted her debriefed. She traveled in silence, the hum of the C-130 heavy in her ears, her crutches tucked under the seat. When she entered the briefing room, she found rows of officers in crisp uniforms, their faces expectant. They wanted the story, the details, the heroics. She gave them the truth. Not the myth, not the polished version. She told them about the fear, the hesitation, the pain of each bullet tearing into her. She told them about carrying while her leg nearly buckled, about the shame of almost collapsing, about the darkness that swallowed her when she finally couldn't hold on. The room was silent when she finished. Finally, a general spoke. "Specialist Jones, what you did was extraordinary. But tell me, what do you believe soldiers should learn from it?" Thought for a long moment. Then she said, "That strength isn't about never breaking, it's about breaking and still moving. And that sometimes the rules don't save lives, people do." The general nodded slowly. The words were written down, passed along, repeated in rooms she'd never see. But didn't linger in Kabul. She asked to return to her base, to her team, to the desert where the sand still carried the echoes of what she had done. Back at Wolverine, she walked with a limp, but she walked with purpose. The men saw it. The ones who once doubted her now followed her lead without question. And yet, she never raised her voice. She never demanded authority. It simply came, quiet and unshakable. One evening found her sitting outside the wire, watching the horizon as the sun bled red into the sand. "You know," he said, settling beside her, "they're talking about transferring you back stateside. Med board, medical retirement. You could be home in 6 months." Didn't take her eyes off the horizon. Home, what does that even mean anymore? Was silent. She turned to him, her face calm but lined with something deeper. "I don't want to be remembered as the woman who got shot 4 times and carried SEALs. I want to be remembered as someone who didn't walk away when it mattered." Nodded slowly. "Then don't walk away, stay. But if you stay, understand, this war will keep asking more of you, and one day it might ask too much." Looked back at the horizon. Her scars ached in the cool evening air. Her body would never be the same, but in her chest something steady pulsed, a refusal to stand still. Maybe, she thought, that was her strength. Not that she had survived, but that she was still willing to step forward even. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretched long across the desert. And Silent, still breathing, knew the question wasn't whether she would go back. It was whether she could live with herself if she didn't. What does a soldier carry when the war finally goes quiet? For it wasn't medals, or commendations, or the official paperwork that now labeled her wounded in action, extraordinary valor. It was the silence. The silence of the desert nights when the stars stared back at her without mercy. The silence in her chest when the memory of each bullet returned. The silence of faces she saved and those she couldn't. That silence stayed with her long after the gunfire stopped. By the 6th month she was stronger. Her limp remained, her shoulder ached in cold mornings, but her body had learned its new limits. She could run again, though not fast. She could lift again, though not heavy. She could carry herself, not as she once had, but enough. The Army gave her a choice: stay deployed with limited duty, or rotate home for recovery and eventual reassignment. Most expected her to choose home, to accept the quiet life she'd earned, far from the dust and danger. But didn't choose, not immediately. Instead, she walked the perimeter one evening, watching the towers glow in the fading sun, the flags snapping hard in the desert wind. Soldiers moved past her, busy, loud, alive. And she realized she belonged to both worlds now, the war and the silence after. She couldn't escape either. The men she saved visited often, walked without crutches now, though slowly, still carried scars across his ribs. Both wore the easy smiles of survivors who knew they'd been pulled back from the edge. They never said thank you anymore. They didn't need to. Gratitude had passed into something deeper, a bond none of them needed to name, but also felt the weight of being seen. No longer invisible, no longer dismissed, she found herself the center of every story whispered across the base. Soldiers asked her to speak at briefings, to motivate, to advise. Some even treated her like a talisman. If she had survived, maybe they would too. Accepted it with grace, but inside she felt uneasy, because myths don't bleed, and she bled every day. One night Chief sat across from her at the fire pit. The embers glowed red, throwing long shadows against the sandbags. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I've been thinking," she murmured. "Dangerous habit." She almost smiled. "They keep calling me a hero, but I don't feel like one. Heroes don't wake up shaking from dreams. Heroes don't hate themselves for hesitating. Heroes don't feel broken." Leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Maybe that's the lie, Jones. Maybe heroes are the ones who do feel all that and still keep going anyway. She stared at him, the firelight flickering across her scars. For the first time, the words didn't feel like empty comfort. They felt true. But truth came with another weight, choice. Knew her time here was ending. Either by rotation or by decision, she would leave this place. The army would move on as it always did. The question was, what part of her would remain? The answer came unexpectedly. A convoy returned one morning under fire, bringing with it a young private barely older than 19. He was shaken, silent, eyes wide as though he'd stared into the abyss and barely stepped back. The medics treated him, but his fear clung like a shadow. Later found him sitting alone by the fence line. She approached slowly, her limp uneven in the gravel. "You okay?" she asked. He shook his head. "I froze first firefight. My squad leader was yelling at me to return fire, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, I just froze." His voice cracked. "I shouldn't be here." Lowered herself beside him, wincing as her thigh protested. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she rolled up her sleeve, showing him the scar on her shoulder. She lifted the hem of her shirt slightly, revealing the bandages across her side. "I froze too," she said softly. "More than once I bled, I broke, and I thought I wouldn't make it out." The private blinked, startled. "But you carried them. Everyone says you." "Everyone says a lot of things," she cut in gently. "What matters isn't the story. What matters is the step you take after you freeze, after you fall. That's the only thing the war remembers." The boy swallowed hard, eyes locked on hers. For the first time since she'd seen him, he nodded. Later that night lay awake in her bunk, the desert wind rattling the tent. And she realized this was her place now, not in the myths, not in the medals, but here among the broken, reminding them that broken didn't mean finished. When her orders came a week later, rotation stateside, she accepted them quietly. Her last night at Wolverine, the base gathered for a subdued farewell. No speeches, no ceremony, just men and women who had seen her fight, seen her bleed, seen her rise again. They raised canteens, toasted not to her but with her. Chief clasped her shoulder before she boarded the helicopter. His voice was low, meant only for her. "Jones, you carried them 3 miles through hell, but don't forget you carried yourself farther. Don't stop now." She nodded, too full to speak. As the lifted, the base fell away beneath her. The desert stretched endless, the horizon burning gold with dawn. She pressed her forehead against the window, eyes closed. And in that moment she understood. Strength was not in the firefight, not in the medals, not even in the survival. Strength was in the dignity of rising each day with scars and still stepping forward, quietly, without demand, without needing the world to notice. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.